I needed a big monster ape for my fake trailer, The Apes of Frankenstein. So I started creating it by doing an EVA foam underskull. Because I knew I wanted it to be really big, I made a gigantic muzzle to start with and worked from there. Very simple mechanism, as you can see, a rope hinge. It's just got rubber bands for the opening and closing. But it was a little wobbly, so I strengthened it with some cloth and neoprene. I don't use neoprene anymore, but it worked all right on this one. The teeth and the interior of the mouth were EVA foam with hot glue texture done on them, and then they were, when they were finished, they were coated with neoprene again. A bit messy, but that's okay. This guy was going to be really monstrous, so I knew the paint would bring it together. And when I painted it, actually I overpainted it a bit because I did want it to be sort of a caricatured old Hammer movie kind of creature. And so it's a little garish in some ways, which I like on this one. And then once the mouth was done, it was on to some of the limbs. A lot of sheet foam buildup. One hand was a gorilla hand, one was going to be an orangutan. The feet were based on EVA, and then just a lot of foam buildup on top of them, cotton batting, and neoprene on top of that for the skin layer. And that was pretty much my approach on the whole thing. Just creating simple forms and simple detail, really, with the cotton batting. But it came together pretty quickly. This was actually a fairly fun build. The head wound up being quite a bit of a challenge, getting a feel for it, for what it should look like, what it could look like. And that took a little while, playing with proportions and trying to pull together something that was a look. The body was going along at the same time, which was just obviously, as you can see, sweatpants and a t-shirt. On the head, I was going with radio control. There's two little servos here, which wound up being just a little too little at the end of the day. The brow is a single servo. The nose had a little bit of a wiggle on a servo, and then a single servo on the lower lip for movement. It was more than enough for what I was going to ask this creature to do in the trailer. It's not an approach I would do on a real film, because this should all be out of foam latex or silicone for the skins. The neoprene was neoprene and cotton batting was pretty restrictive, actually, so I had to do a lot of strange reworking and laying over of elements to pull it together. But it did finally start coming together and moving well enough for what I needed it to do. Then the question really was, what the heck was it going to look like? I needed it to be monstrous. So I just really started doing foam buildup on it, just to start building the masses out, to get a feel for it. I gave it a little bit of a Frankenstein's monster brow, or what would you call that? Skull ridge for the suture marks. Slowly built it up. Again, the same techniques, piece by piece. Very thin in some sections for movement, very heavy in others for support. And as it came together, it really was when I started getting the paint on it that I started to get a feel for what this thing was going to really become. And build-up's a little funny that way. You can't always predict which way it's going, especially with something as sort of clunky and deranged as this is. But I fiddled with the paint enough to where I was happy. I added, the head bolts and suture straps, nice little details that added a little bit more to it. The pieces all started getting a little more believable, coming together, sort of unifying an ununified thing. And I was getting happy with it. I really was. The orangutan arm is huge. It's just huge. It's on a arm extension with just a simple wrist mechanism, but it's big. I got a picture somewhere down the line here. And then I had to put in all of the sutures, which took forever because I couldn't actually sew it. I had to just punch holes and put each one of those pieces in separately. But finally, it was coming together, a really disgusting, sort of cobbled together, semi-diseased looking thing. And the hair was the final addition to it. And I used material fur for the majority of it, just because it covered a lot and would allow for the movement. And after that, I used canicolon just to sort of vary it a bit, and so I could get a lot more tones in it. And it was a slow process because I had to lay up all the hair. I couldn't punch any of it. But it finally started looking like something that I might want it to look like. I had to replace the two little servos because they burned out. But there was room for one big servo in there. And it was still enough for what I'd need. Next was the body. I had to pull this thing together. And it was a lot of work, but it was really fun. It was all scrap foam. This is all just junk I had lying around. And I tried to design it so that the pieces were not actually connected, so there'd be a lot better movement. And it was really the cotton batting and flexible neoprene that allowed for a nice movement with all the spaces left in there. So I detailed out the body with what other sections were actually showing that weren't haired. With all the same details as the head. And it was done in pieces. It was a pants, essentially, a shirt and pants suit with boots and hands. And the orange fur was pretty orange. I did wind up having to paint it down and take it down quite a bit. But this thing was pretty big suit. I mean, you can see that's a pretty big arm. I'm not a tiny guy. It's a pretty big arm. But finally, at the end of the day, I had my big monster ape thing together. I think it comes across pretty fun on screen. It's not meant to be too serious. But it actually does look pretty cool in some of the shots. So it was a lot of work, a lot of fun work, but I was pretty happy with it.